Naomi Campbell, a fashion icon whose name alone evokes decades of runway dominance, was no stranger to the spotlight's glare. Known for her unapologetic candor and fierce presence, she had navigated controversies with the grace of a panther. So when The Late Show with Stephen Colbert announced her as the guest following the buzz around the Met Gala, anticipation crackled like static. The event, a pinnacle of high fashion, had been abuzz with whispers about Campbell's absence, a decision that sent shockwaves through the industry. Why had she skipped the gala, an event she'd once ruled like royalty? Was it a statement, a snub, or something more personal? The studio hummed with excitement, the audience primed for revelations. Stephen Colbert, with his sharp wit and knack for probing, took the stage, his grin hinting at the mischief to come. He opened with a nod to Campbell's legacy, but his eyes gleamed with the promise of digging deeper. "We've got Naomi Campbell tonight, folks," he said, pausing as the crowd roared. "But what's the real story behind that Met Gala no-show?" The laughter was immediate, tinged with curiosity. Could Colbert coax the truth from a woman known for guarding her narrative? Would Campbell play along, or would she push back? The stage was set, the lights blazed, and the tension was already simmering. What had kept her from fashion's biggest night? Was there a feud brewing beneath the surface? The audience leaned in, sensing a clash that would ignite the internet. Hit that subscribe button, comment where you're watching from, and stick around to see why Naomi storms off in a moment no one saw coming. The audience's cheers still echoed as Naomi Campbell glided onto the stage, her presence a masterclass in poise and power. Dressed in a sleek black ensemble that shimmered under the studio lights, she exuded an effortless elegance, her eyes scanning the crowd with a regal calm. Stephen Colbert rose to greet her, his handshake warm but his smile carrying a playful edge, as if he were already plotting his approach. The crowd erupted, their applause a testament to her enduring star power. As they settled into their seats, Colbert eased into the interview, starting with praise for Campbell's trailblazing career. He lauded her influence on fashion, her philanthropy, and her ability to command any room. Campbell nodded, her smile gracious but guarded, her posture impeccable. The conversation flowed smoothly at first, with Colbert asking about her latest projects and her reflections on decades in the industry. But the air shifted when he pivoted to the Met Gala, his tone turning teasing. He leaned forward, holding up a photo from a past gala where Campbell had stolen the show. "You're practically the queen of the Met Gala," he said, pausing for effect. "So what happened this year? Did you just decide to skip the party?" The audience laughed, but Campbell's smile tightened, her fingers adjusting the bracelet on her wrist. She responded vaguely, mentioning a scheduling conflict, but her voice carried a subtle edge, a warning Colbert seemed to miss. He pressed on, joking about rumors of a backstage feud with a designer, his eyes gleaming with mischief. The crowd chuckled, but Campbell's gaze sharpened, her silence louder than the applause. The crew in the control booth exchanged glances, sensing the first ripples of tension. Had Colbert's jab hit a nerve? Was Campbell's absence tied to something deeper, something personal? The stage felt smaller, the stakes higher, as the interview veered toward treacherous waters. The studio's atmosphere grew taut as Stephen Colbert, emboldened by the audience's laughter, leaned deeper into the Met Gala mystery. His playful jab about a rumored designer feud had landed, but Naomi Campbell's reaction, a tightening of her jaw, a flicker of steel in her eyes, hinted at a storm beneath her composed exterior. Colbert, sensing he'd struck a chord, doubled down, his tone still light but probing. He pulled out another photo, this one of Campbell at a previous gala, draped in a gown that had set social media ablaze. "This is you, owning the red carpet," he said, grinning. "But this year, nothing. Come on, Naomi, give us the tea. Was it a diva moment, or did someone cross you?" The audience roared, some clapping eagerly, but Campbell's expression hardened, her hands resting still in her lap, as if anchoring her restraint. She responded with measured calm, reiterating that her absence was a personal choice, but her voice carried a chill that cut through the room's warmth. The crowd's laughter faded into murmurs, their eyes darting between Colbert's mischievous grin and Campbell's unyielding stare. Undeterred, Colbert pressed further, tossing out a quip about how the gala just wasn't the same without its queen. He mimicked a dramatic hair flip, drawing scattered chuckles, but Campbell didn't flinch. Her silence was deafening, a deliberate pause that seemed to pull the air from the studio. The crew in the control booth tensed, the monitors showing close-ups of Campbell's poised but fiery demeanor. Had Colbert misjudged the line between humor and intrusion? Was Campbell's absence a sore spot, tied to a betrayal or a stand against the fashion world's elite? The interview was no longer a casual chat. It was a high-stakes dance, and the audience could feel the rhythm shifting toward confrontation. The studio's energy crackled with unease as Naomi Campbell's icy silence in response to Stephen Colbert's Met Gala jabs cast a shadow over the set. His playful mimicry and insinuations about her absence had pushed the interview into perilous territory, and the audience, sensing the shift, grew quieter, their murmurs replacing earlier laughter. Campbell sat regal, her posture impeccable, but her eyes burned with a quiet fury that seemed to pin Colbert in place. The host, still clinging to his comedic rhythm, tried to pivot, but his grin faltered as he leaned forward with another quip. He suggested, with a wink, that perhaps Campbell had skipped the gala because she couldn't find a dress dramatic enough to top her past looks. The crowd chuckled nervously, but the joke landed like a misfired arrow. Campbell's lips pressed into a thin line, her fingers tightening around the edge of her chair. She spoke then, her voice low and deliberate, stating that her choices were her own and not for public dissection. The words were sharp, a clear warning, but Colbert, misreading the room, laughed it off, tossing out a comment about how fashion feuds make the best headlines. The audience's response was tepid, a few claps drowned by the weight of Campbell's presence. The camera zoomed in on her face, capturing the slow burn of her anger, a storm gathering behind her poised facade. Colbert, sweat beading on his brow, tried to steer the conversation toward her charity work, but the damage was done. The crew in the control booth exchanged panicked glances, the monitors flashing between Campbell's unyielding stare and Colbert's strained smile. Had Colbert's relentless probing crossed into disrespect? Was Campbell's restraint about to snap, or was she biding her time for a calculated strike? The tension was a living thing, coiling tighter with each passing second. As the audience waited for the inevitable clash, the studio pulsed with a charged stillness, Naomi Campbell's sharp rebuke of Stephen Colbert's Met Gala jabs hanging like a blade in the air. Her assertion that her choices were not for public dissection had silenced the crowd, their earlier enthusiasm replaced by a tense anticipation. Colbert, visibly rattled but desperate to maintain control, forced a chuckle, his hands fidgeting with a pen as he tried to pivot to safer ground. He asked about Campbell's latest fashion campaigns, hoping to steer the conversation back to her professional triumphs, but his voice lacked its usual confidence, the words stumbling out. Campbell's responses were curt, her tone clipped as she offered minimal details, her eyes never leaving the host. Each syllable seemed to carry a warning, a reminder of the line he'd crossed. Undeterred, or perhaps too deep to back out, Colbert tried to lighten the mood with another ill-fated quip, suggesting that maybe she'd skipped the gala to avoid a catfight with a rival model. The audience gasped, the joke landing like a spark in a powder keg. Campbell's posture stiffened, her fingers pausing mid-gesture, her gaze now a searing force that seemed to strip Colbert bare. She didn't respond immediately, letting the silence stretch, heavy and deliberate, until the room felt suffocating. When she spoke, her voice was low, cutting through the studio's artificial warmth. She accused Colbert of trivializing her life for cheap laughs, her words measured but laced with venom. The crowd murmured, a mix of shock and awe, as Colbert's face flushed, his smile crumbling under the weight of her stare. The crew in the control booth held their breath, the monitors showing close-ups of Campbell's regal fury and Colbert's faltering composure. Had Colbert's persistence pushed her too far? Was Campbell about to unleash a reckoning, or was she still holding back? The confrontation was teetering on the edge, and the audience was riveted, sensing the storm about to break. The studio was a pressure cooker. Naomi Campbell's piercing accusation that Stephen Colbert was trivializing her life for laughs reverberating through the stunned audience. The crowd, now silent, leaned forward, their eyes darting between Campbell's regal indignation and Colbert's crumbling facade. The host, his face flushed with embarrassment, tried to salvage the moment, his voice cracking as he offered a weak apology, claiming his jokes were meant in good fun. But the words sounded hollow, drowned by the weight of Campbell's unyielding stare. She sat motionless, her posture a study in controlled fury, her eyes burning with a fire that seemed to expose every flaw in Colbert's performance. Sensing the segment spiraling, he tried to pivot again, asking about her advocacy for diversity in fashion. But Campbell's responses remained icy, each word a deliberate jab at his earlier indiscretions. The audience's murmurs grew louder, a mix of discomfort and fascination, as Colbert's usual charm faltered. In a desperate bid to regain the crowd, he ventured one last joke, suggesting that maybe she'd skip the Met Gala to rehearse her runway walk for next year. The quip was met with scattered laughs, but Campbell's reaction was swift, her voice cutting through the room like a whip. She declared that her decisions were rooted in principle, not pettiness, and that Colbert's mockery was beneath her. The crowd gasped, a few clapping in awe as her words landed with surgical precision. Colbert's smile vanished, his hands stalling mid-gesture, his eyes darting to the audience for support that wasn't there. The crew in the control booth scrambled, the monitors flashing chaotic close-ups of Campbell's commanding presence, and Colbert's visible panic. Had Campbell's rebuke exposed the limits of Colbert's humor? Was she poised to escalate further, or had she already won the battle? The tension was electric, a showdown reaching its boiling point as the audience waited for the next move. The studio was a crucible of raw emotion. Naomi Campbell's searing declaration that Stephen Colbert's mockery was beneath her echoing like a thunderclap. The audience, now fully ensnared by the drama, sat in rapt silence, their earlier laughter replaced by a collective awe. Colbert, stripped of his usual poise, slumped slightly behind his desk, his face a mask of humiliation as he struggled to respond. His attempt at a chuckle was feeble, his voice barely above a whisper as he mumbled about respecting Campbell's choices. But the words lacked conviction, swallowed by the weight of her commanding presence. Campbell, her posture unyielding, leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked on the host with an intensity that seemed to unravel him further. She spoke again, her voice low but resonant, accusing Colbert of reducing her life's complexities to a punchline for ratings. The accusation was a blade, slicing through the studio's artificial warmth and exposing the fragility of Colbert's comedic armor. The crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement, others whispering in shock, as the divide in their reactions mirrored the broader cultural fault lines Campbell's words had tapped into. Colbert tried to pivot, his hands fumbling with a cue card, but Campbell cut him off, her tone now laced with disdain as she questioned his understanding of the fashion world's politics. The audience gasped, a few cheers breaking through the tension, as Colbert's face reddened, his eyes darting to the floor. The camera captured every excruciating detail, zooming in on Campbell's regal fury and Colbert's shrinking composure. The crew in the control booth stood frozen, the monitors flashing between her righteous indignation and his floundering panic. Had Campbell's words struck at the heart of Colbert's credibility? Was she building to a final devastating blow, or had she already claimed victory? The confrontation was at its zenith, a clash of wills that held the audience captive, each second pulsing with the promise of a decisive moment. The studio was a battlefield, Naomi Campbell's relentless verbal onslaught leaving Stephen Colbert exposed and reeling. Her accusation that he'd reduced her life to a punchline, coupled with her biting question about his grasp of fashion's politics, had silenced the room, the audience hanging on her every word. Colbert, his face flushed with a mix of shame and desperation, tried to muster a response, stammering an apology that sounded more like a plea. But Campbell's presence, towering even while seated, rendered his words insignificant. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, seemed to strip away the last of his comedic armor, leaving him visibly diminished. The crowd, now a sea of murmurs and scattered cheers, sensed the shift. Campbell was no longer just a guest. She was a force reclaiming her narrative. In a final, desperate bid to salvage the segment, Colbert tried to pivot to a lighter topic, asking about her upcoming projects. But Campbell wasn't having it. She rose from her chair, her movements slow and deliberate, her voice cutting through the studio as she declared she wouldn't sit through any more of his trivializing nonsense. The audience gasped, a collective jolt of shock as she turned and strode toward the stage's edge, her heels clicking with purpose. Colbert, frozen behind his desk, could only watch, his mouth agape, as she exited, leaving a void where her commanding presence had been. The crowd erupted in a mix of applause and stunned whispers, their eyes locked on the empty chair. The crew, in the control booth, scrambled, signaling for a commercial break, but the damage was done. The camera lingered on Colbert's ashen face, capturing his humiliation in stark detail. Had Campbell planned this exit to assert her dominance, or had Colbert's relentless jabs pushed her to her limit? Was there any way for the host to recover from this public dismantling? The moment was raw, unscripted, and unforgettable, a triumph for Campbell that left the audience reeling and the internet poised to explode. The studio lights dimmed as Naomi Campbell's dramatic exit left a stunned silence in its wake, her heel's final echo fading behind the curtain. Stephen Colbert, still seated behind his desk, looked like a man who'd been caught in a storm, his face pale, his hands gripping the edge of his desk as if to anchor himself. The audience, a mix of awe and disbelief, erupted into a chaotic blend of applause and murmurs, their eyes darting between the empty stage and Colbert's shell-shocked expression. The host forced a weak smile, his voice trembling as he mumbled about the unpredictability of live television. But the words fell flat, drowned by the weight of Campbell's departure. He signaled for the band to play, a desperate attempt to fill the void. But the music felt jarring against the raw emotion of the moment. The crew in the control booth, frantic, cut to commercial break, the monitors flashing with close-ups of Colbert's strained face and the audience's divided reactions. As the show paused, clips of Campbell's walkout flooded social media, igniting a firestorm. Hashtags trended worldwide, memes of her regal stride, and Colbert's stunned silence spreading like wildfire. News outlets pounced, with headlines screaming Naomi Campbell storms off Colbert in Met Gala feud, and Colbert left speechless by Campbell's exit. Pundits hailed her as a titan who'd reclaimed her power, while Colbert's fans scrambled to defend him, arguing he'd meant no harm. The unedited footage, shared relentlessly, racked up millions of views, each click cementing Campbell's triumph. She never addressed the incident, moving on to her next appearance with serene confidence, her silence amplifying her victory. The moment became a cultural touchstone, proof that Campbell could command any stage and leave her detractors in the dust. Colbert, humbled, faced a reckoning, his misstep a lesson in respecting a legend's boundaries. The audience, both in the studio and online, was left in awe, witnessing a clash where one woman's defiance rewrote the narrative, turning a late-night misfire into an iconic triumph.